On February 14th, 1990, an engineer at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory sent a set of commands across more than 7 billion miles of empty space, telling a spacecraft that had already finished its job to turn around one last time. Voyager 1 had flown past Jupiter in 1979 and Saturn in 1980. It had done everything it was built to do. There was nothing left ahead of it worth photographing. No more planets close enough to matter, nothing but the long, dark road out of the solar system. NASA had already decided to shut its cameras down permanently to save power for the instruments that actually mattered for the journey still ahead. But before that happened, one member of the imaging team pushed for years to have the spacecraft do one more thing before its eyes closed forever. To understand why that push took years rather than a single conversation, it helps to understand how NASA actually thought about mission priorities at the time. Voyager 1 had already delivered everything it was funded and designed to deliver. Every additional command sent to the spacecraft, every extra image captured and transmitted, cost real engineering time, real deep space network bandwidth, and real electrical power that mission planners were already trying to conserve for the long journey ahead. Turning the cameras around to photograph a planet so far away it would barely register as anything at all wasn't an obvious use of any of those limited resources. It took a genuinely compelling argument, repeated over years, to convince a cautious, resource-conscious mission team that this specific, scientifically minor photograph was worth taking anyway. His name was Carl Sagan, and what he wanted wasn't scientifically necessary. He wanted Voyager 1 to turn its camera back toward home and take a picture of Earth. From that distance, he knew exactly what it would show, almost nothing. A point of light. A single fragile pixel, or less than one, lost in a scattering beam of sunlight. NASA had resisted the idea for years, precisely because there was so little scientific value in it. But Sagan kept making the case, and on February 13th and 14th, 1990, engineers finally sent the command. Voyager 1 executed a sequence of 60 images over those 2 days, producing what NASA called the family portrait of the solar system, color views of 6 planets, along with a monochrome image of the sun itself. Mercury was lost in the sun's glare. Mars didn't register usefully, but Venus, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune all appeared, along with one single frame, taken at 4:48 UTC on February 14th. That would outlast almost everything else the mission ever returned. In that frame, Earth appears as a fraction of a single pixel. The Planetary Society has put the figure at approximately 0, 12 of a pixel, which is to say, a handful of scattered photons, not anything resembling a visible disk. It sits inside one of several rays of sunlight scattered across the frame by Voyager's own camera optics, one of which happens to fall directly across our planet's position in the image, almost as if the frame had been composed on purpose. It hadn't been. That was simply where the light landed. It's worth being precise about what that 0, 12-pixel figure actually means, because it's easy to hear a number like that and picture something merely small when the reality is considerably stranger. A single pixel is already the smallest unit of detail a digital camera sensor can register, the atomic building block of any image it produces. Earth, in this photograph, doesn't even fill that smallest possible unit. It occupies roughly 1/8 of it. There's no version of this image at any zoom level or any enhancement that reveals continents, oceans, clouds, or city lights, because that information was never captured in the first place. The entire planet, every ocean and mountain range and living thing on it, was compressed by simple distance and geometry into a fragment of reflected sunlight smaller than the smallest thing the camera could even properly record. Sagan gave the image its name 3 years later in his 1994 book of the same title. He wrote the words that have outlived nearly everything else connected to this mission. "Look again at that dot," he said. "That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was lived out their lives." What made that framing so effective wasn't poetic exaggeration. It was restraint. Sagan didn't need to describe Earth's beauty, its cities, its history, or its complexity, because the photograph itself had already stripped all of that away. Every war, every celebration, every scientific discovery, every single life ever lived had all taken place on that one point of scattered light. And the image made that scale legible not through composition or artistic choice, but simply through the physics of how far away the camera happened to be standing when it looked back. Roughly 34 minutes after that image was taken, according to reporting from Earth sky, Voyager 1 powered off its cameras. Forever. Not paused. Not put into standby for a future reactivation. Permanently deactivated to conserve the last remaining scraps of power for a spacecraft that NASA hoped, even then, might keep functioning for decades still to come. It took until May 1st, 1990, for that final roll of images to finish trickling back to Earth through NASA's deep space network, arriving in fragments over the weeks after the cameras had already gone dark for good. Think about that specific detail for a moment. The camera that captured this image had already been permanently switched off, weeks before all of its own data had even finished arriving on Earth. The instrument was gone before the picture it took had fully materialized for anyone to see. There's something quietly fitting about that sequence. Humanity's last look back at itself from deep space, still slowly making its way home, even after the eye that captured it had already closed for good. That's the real story behind the phrase people sometimes use loosely, Voyager 1's final images. They aren't a metaphor. They are a specific, dated, sourced sequence of 60 frames, taken over 2 days in February 1990, the last photographs this particular spacecraft will ever return because the instrument that took them has now sat unused for more than 36 years, and there's no scenario under which it will ever be switched back on. So why does this feel newly relevant right now in 2026? Because Voyager 1 is once again in the news for a reason that connects directly back to that same 1990 decision, the ongoing decades-long project of deciding exactly what to switch off and when in order to keep the rest of the spacecraft alive for as long as physically possible. Both Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 run on something called a radioisotope thermoelectric generator, a device that converts heat from slowly decaying plutonium into usable electricity. There's no solar power involved. By the time these spacecraft reached the outer planets, sunlight was already far too weak out there to be useful. According to NASA, that plutonium heat source naturally decays over time, and combined with general wear on the hardware, both Voyager spacecraft lose approximately 4 watts of power every single year. That number sounds small. Compounded across nearly 50 years of continuous operation, it has become the single defining constraint on this entire mission. To put 4 watts in everyday terms, that's roughly the power draw of a small nightlight, or a fraction of what a single incandescent bulb once used. Losing that little power in a single year sounds almost trivial, but multiply it out across 49 years of continuous operation, and you're looking at a spacecraft that started with a certain fixed electrical budget and has been steadily, irreversibly losing a meaningful chunk of it, year after year, with no way to ever add power back. Unlike a car battery or a household appliance, there's no swapping in a fresh power source, no recharging, no maintenance visit possible at a distance of billions of miles. Whatever power remains on board right now is, quite literally, all that will ever be available for the rest of this mission's life. Engineers have been managing that slow drain deliberately since long before this year. According to NASA's own mission status page, Voyager 1's plasma science instrument had already been switched off back in 2007 due to degraded performance rather than a power-saving decision. The cosmic ray subsystem was switched off specifically to save power on February 25, 2025. And then, on April 17, 2026, NASA sent a command to shut down one more, the Low-Energy Charged Particles Experiment, known as LECP, an instrument that had been running almost continuously since Voyager 1 first launched in 1977, very nearly 49 consecutive years of uninterrupted operation, ended by a single deliberate command sent across a distance so vast the signal took more than 23 hours just to arrive. According to NASA's own blog post announcing that decision, mission engineers at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory made the call after a scare that had happened weeks earlier. During a routine, planned roll maneuver on February 27, 2026, Voyager 1's power levels dropped unexpectedly, enough that the spacecraft came close to triggering its own undervoltage fault protection system, a safety mechanism specifically designed to shut the probe down into a protective safe mode if its power ever drops dangerously low. Kareem Badruddin of NASA JPL, quoted directly in coverage from Sky and Telescope, put it plainly: shutting down a science instrument is not anybody's preference, but it was the best option available. A roll maneuver like the one that triggered this scare is a fairly routine procedure, essentially rotating the spacecraft briefly to recalibrate its magnetometer readings against Earth's own known magnetic field as a reference point, something the mission has performed periodically for years without incident. The fact that a genuinely routine, previously uneventful maneuver came this close to tripping a fault protection shutdown is itself a signal of just how thin Voyager 1's power margins have become. A procedure that would have been completely unremarkable a decade ago is now, in 2026, close enough to the edge of the spacecraft's remaining capacity that engineers had to respond with an entire instrument shutdown just to create a wider safety buffer going forward. That decision left Voyager 1 with exactly 2 operating science instruments: the magnetometer, which detects magnetic fields in the space between stars, and the plasma wave subsystem, which detects the interactions of charged particles in that same environment. 2 instruments out of an original suite of 10 that this spacecraft carried when it launched in September 1977 to study Jupiter and Saturn. Everything else, the cameras that captured the pale blue dot, the ultraviolet spectrometer that stayed useful until it was finally switched off in 2016, the cosmic ray detector, the plasma science instrument, and now the low-energy charged particle experiment, has gone dark, one careful, deliberate decision at a time, spread out across more than 3.5 decades. It's worth being honest about what this actually is and isn't. This isn't Voyager 1 failing or malfunctioning or breaking down in some dramatic, sudden way. It's the opposite. It's the direct, natural consequence of an engineering team successfully keeping a machine alive for nearly 50 years past its original planned mission, using a power source that was always going to run down eventually by deliberately trading away function for longevity, one instrument at a time, in exactly the order that keeps the spacecraft itself alive the longest. There's a genuinely hopeful piece of this story too, and it's one that a lot of coverage has focused on this year. According to reporting from CNN and confirmed by NASA's own announcements, engineers are developing something they've nicknamed, only half-jokingly, the Big Bang, a coordinated plan to swap out several of the spacecraft's power-hungry components all at once, replacing them with more efficient alternatives, in an effort to free up enough power to potentially keep the spacecraft's remaining systems running for years longer than currently projected, and possibly even bring a previously shut-down instrument back online. The logic behind bundling several component swaps into one single coordinated procedure, rather than making changes one at a time, comes down to risk management at this kind of extreme distance. Every single command sent to Voyager 1 carries some risk of an unexpected complication. Given hardware, this old operating in an environment no engineer designing it in the 1970s could have fully anticipated. Rather than accept that risk repeatedly, spread out over dozens of separate small changes, the team's plan bundles multiple efficiency upgrades into one carefully rehearsed sequence, minimizing the number of separate high-risk moments the aging spacecraft has to survive. Because a maneuver like that carries real risk, Voyager 2 has slightly more power margin available and sits closer to Earth, making communication faster and troubleshooting easier. NASA's plan, according to Science Daily's coverage published in May 2026, is to test this Big Bang procedure on Voyager 2 first, with testing scheduled for May and June of 2026, before attempting the same fix on Voyager 1 no sooner than July. If it works as hoped, NASA's engineers have said they're hoping to keep at least one instrument operating on each spacecraft into the 2030s, pushing this nearly 50-year-old mission meaningfully further than almost anyone would have guessed possible when it first launched. There's something worth appreciating about choosing Voyager 2 as the test subject specifically because it's the safer option. Even the backup plan in this story involves a spacecraft that's been continuously operating for close to 50 years, traveling through a region of space no human-made object had ever reached before either Voyager probe got there. The fact that NASA can talk about one nearly 50-year-old interstellar spacecraft as the lower-risk option relative to its equally ancient twin says something about just how far both of these machines have already exceeded every reasonable expectation set for them at launch. That timeline matters because of just how difficult troubleshooting anything on this spacecraft has become. According to reporting from Space Daily, a single command sent from Earth now takes more than 23 hours just to reach Voyager 1 one way, meaning any adjustment, any diagnostic check, any response to an unexpected reading requires waiting nearly 2 full days round trip before engineers even know whether their fix worked. A small error, a momentarily cold thruster, an unexpected power dip triggering an automatic fault protection response, any of these can take days simply to properly diagnose, let alone correct, at a distance this extreme. And that distance keeps growing every single day, because Voyager 1 has never stopped moving. According to NASA's own status reporting, the spacecraft is now traveling at roughly 38,000 miles per hour, carrying it further from Earth with every passing second, even as its onboard power supply continues its slow, unstoppable decline. In November 2026, according to multiple space news outlets tracking the mission, Voyager 1 will cross a specific, precisely calculable milestone. It will become so distant that a radio signal traveling at the literal speed of light, the fastest anything can travel, according to everything we understand about physics, will take a full 24 hours to cross the gap between the spacecraft and Earth. NASA's own materials specifically frame that milestone carefully. Voyager 1 will be one light day from Earth, not approaching another star system and not leaving the influence of our sun's gravity entirely. It's a specific, precise distance marker, not a mythical boundary. It's worth sitting with what that distance actually represents, in more everyday terms. Sunlight itself takes about 8 minutes to reach Earth from the sun. A signal from Voyager 1, by comparison, will soon take 24 hours, 180 times longer than it takes light to cross the gap between us and our own star. The spacecraft, launched in 1977 with hardware built using technology considerably less powerful than what's inside a modern digital watch, has traveled far enough, for long enough, that we now measure the distance to it not in miles or kilometers, but in units normally reserved for describing gaps between entire star systems. Consider what that means for something as simple as sending a single command. An engineer at JPL types out an instruction, sends it, and then has to wait a full day before that command even arrives at the spacecraft, and then another full day after that, before any confirmation of what happened makes its way back. A conversation that would take seconds between two people standing in the same room takes 48 hours between Earth and Voyager 1, and that round-trip time itself keeps getting slightly longer every single day as the gap between us continues to widen. Every single decision about this spacecraft's remaining power, every diagnosis of an unexpected reading, has to be made against that backdrop of genuinely extreme and permanently worsening communication delay. There's a reason NASA keeps paying close attention to a mission running on 2 remaining instruments and a rapidly aging power supply, rather than simply letting it fade quietly. According to NASA's own materials, no other functioning spacecraft is currently sampling interstellar space from anywhere near the same distance or the same vantage point. Every measurement Voyager 1's magnetometer and plasma wave instrument still send back is, right now, literally the only direct data humanity has about this specific region of space between the stars, a region no probe had ever physically reached before Voyager 1 crossed into it in 2012, and no other operating spacecraft has reached since. That scarcity is exactly what makes even 2 remaining instruments genuinely valuable rather than a sad afterthought. A magnetometer. Reading from Voyager 1 tells scientists something about the structure of interstellar space that literally cannot be measured any other way, from any other location, using any other currently operating instrument. Every year this mission continues, even stripped down to its bare minimum functioning systems, adds another irreplaceable data point to our only direct sample of what the environment between the stars actually looks like, moment to moment, at a location this genuinely remote. That's the plain, practical reason this 50-year-old machine still matters scientifically, apart from any sentiment attached to it. But it's genuinely difficult to talk about Voyager 1 without also acknowledging the sentiment, because this spacecraft has always carried more than instruments. Bolted to its side is the Golden Record, a gold-plated copper disc containing sounds, images, music, and greetings from Earth, assembled by a team that included Carl Sagan himself, intended as a message from humanity in case anything, or anyone, out there ever encountered it. That's not a scientific instrument in any conventional sense. It's a deliberate act of hope, sent outward on a machine that was never expected to survive long enough for us to still be discussing its power budget nearly half a century later. It's worth remembering that the same person who fought for years to get one final photograph of Earth taken in 1990 was also directly involved in deciding what that golden record would contain. Greetings in dozens of languages, recordings of wind and thunder and animal calls, a curated sample of human music, and images intended to communicate something true about life on this planet to whoever or whatever might eventually find it. Both the pale blue dot photograph and the golden record share the same underlying idea, that this spacecraft, once it had finished its scientific work, could still carry something purely human outward with it. Not data, but a kind of message in a bottle, cast into a body of water with no known shore on the other side. If you want to check any of this yourself, here's exactly where to look. Search NASA Pale Blue Dot Revisited JPL for NASA's own account of the 1990 family portrait sequence and the exact circumstances of the final images. Search NASA shuts off instrument Voyager 1 April 2026 for NASA's own blog post on the LECP shutdown, quoting Kareem Badaruddin directly. And search Voyager Big Bang Power Fix NASA for CNN and Science Daily's coverage of the upcoming power-saving procedure being tested on Voyager 2 before Voyager 1. Every figure in this video, the 4 watts lost per year, the specific 2025 and 2026 shutdown dates, the 23-hour one-way signal delay, the November 2026 light day milestone, comes directly from NASA's own mission status pages and reporting built directly on NASA's own public statements, not from anonymous insider claims or unnamed officials. It's worth pointing out just how unusual it is that a nearly 50-year-old engineering project still generates genuine current news on a rolling basis this many decades after launch. Most spacecraft either complete their mission and go quiet, or fail outright within years of launch. Voyager 1 has instead become something closer to an ongoing, decades-spanning engineering story, where nearly every year brings a new, specific, dated decision, an instrument switched off here, a power-saving procedure tested there, a scare during a routine maneuver that nearly triggered a safety shutdown, each one small on its own, but collectively adding up to one of the longest sustained engineering efforts in the history of spaceflight. Compare that to almost any other piece of technology from the same era. The average car, computer, or piece of consumer electronics built in 1977 has long since been retired, replaced, or simply thrown away. Voyager 1 is still receiving carefully considered engineering decisions from a dedicated NASA team in 2026, nearly a half a century after it left the launch pad. Not because the hardware is unusually advanced by today's standards, but because a specific group of people has spent decades treating every single watt of remaining power as something worth fighting for. There's something worth noticing in how differently this story reads once you know the actual timeline compared to a version that just says a legendary spacecraft is dying or has been silenced. Voyager 1 isn't being silenced. It's being carefully, deliberately managed by a team of engineers who have spent nearly 5 decades making one hard trade-off after another, in a specific, documented order, purely so this machine can keep functioning for as long as physics will allow. The cameras went dark in 1990, by design, immediately after capturing the one image Carl Sagan fought years to get. The cosmic ray subsystem went dark in 2025. The low-energy charged particle experiment went dark in April 2026. 2 instruments remain, and an entire team at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory is actively working, this year, on a plan nicknamed after the very origin of the universe itself, specifically to keep at least one of those instruments running into the 2030s. That's the real shape of this story. Not an ending, but an extraordinarily long, carefully managed decline, engineered on purpose to stretch as far into the future as 50-year-old hardware and a slowly fading nuclear power source will possibly allow, carrying the entire time a small gold record and a single photograph of a pale blue dot, both of which will keep drifting outward long after the last instrument finally goes quiet for good. It's a strange kind of longevity to think about. A machine built before most of its own mission engineers were even born, still receiving carefully worded commands from a planet it hasn't been able to photograph in over 3 decades, still sending back data from a region of space that remains otherwise completely unexplored. Long after the last signal from Voyager 1 eventually falls silent for good, whether that happens in the early 2030s or if the Big Bang fix succeeds sometime meaningfully later, the spacecraft itself will keep moving outward regardless, carrying that gold record and that one photograph of home forever, with nothing left to report back and no one left listening, simply drifting through the dark exactly the way it has been since the moment its cameras closed for the very last time in February 1990. If you want the real, sourced updates on this mission as they continue to happen, and given how much has changed just in the first 7 months of 2026 alone, there will almost certainly be more, subscribe. Because Voyager 1's story isn't finished yet, and every new development traces back to a specific NASA announcement you can go verify yourself. And if you've heard other claims about Voyager 1 that sounded too dramatic to check, drop them in the comments, and I'll look into exactly what NASA's own mission status actually says. It's genuinely rare for a single spacecraft to still be generating multiple, separately dated news events within 1 calendar year, decades after its launch, a shutdown in February, another in April, testing scheduled for May and June, a fix attempt planned for July, and a historic distance milestone due in November, all within the same 12-month stretch. That alone is worth appreciating on its own terms, regardless of how the rest of this particular chapter of the mission eventually turns out.